My narcissistic husband thought that I slept with his gay friend and demanded a paternity test, so I divorced him and left him miserable. I have been married to my husband for 5 years and we just had our second child. Our first child was a son with blonde hair and freckled skin, a splitting image of my husband. I have naturally red hair, by the way, and my husband loves my hair. But for some reason he was glad that our son wasn't a redhead. He was very proud and bragged a lot about how his genes were superior than mine, and that's why our son looked so much like him. In fact, the only time he stopped talking about it was when I got pregnant again. Throughout the 9 months, he kept telling everyone that our second child was also going to be a blonde and there was no way to prevent this. I thought this was weird but funny, and went along with him by saying, yeah, I also think the baby will have blonde hair. He was really excited because this time we were having a daughter instead of a son. However, his tone completely changed once I gave birth. Our daughter was the opposite of our son, and a complete splitting image of me. She had beautiful red hair and I was so happy for her because she was going to become the most beautiful girl in the world. But my husband showed a concerning lack of happiness. Even before we left the hospital, he kept commenting that the red hair on our daughter was just temporary. And that his genes were just taking their time but would eventually prevail. She would also end up having blonde hair. Again, I didn't get why he was saying all this, but I didn't pay much attention to it. It did bother me that he would avoid holding her, or taking care of her, but I convinced myself that it was nothing. A few weeks later, we held a baby shower for our daughter and my husband invited his gay friend. I surprisingly got along with him since we had a lot in common, and we talked a lot during the party. He also had red hair, but it was obvious that he had dyed it from black, while me and my daughter were natural. He was constantly complimenting how my daughter had the best colored hair and I was really happy. But my husband would sometimes interrupt us, and once again exclaim that the red hair was only temporary. I ended up asking him why he was so adamant on this topic. He explained that since our son had blonde hair, it meant that all our children should be the same because that's how genes work. I tried to explain to him that that wasn't the case at all, but he didn't listen. Anyway, a few days passed and I thought that my husband had finally dropped the topic. But out of nowhere, he came up to me and began demanding a paternity test. That really shocked me because he had never said anything about this before, and with our first child. He was essentially accusing me of cheating on him, something that I would never do. I said that I loved him, so why was he asking for such a thing? He refused to explain and just said that he wanted to be sure. I asked, be sure of what? And kept pressing him to tell me why he was being so suspicious. Being accused of cheating was actually very painful for me, and I wanted to know how he came to that conclusion. After a bit more pressing, he finally cracked and blew up on me while telling me the reason. I saw how you kept talking to my friend at the party. You never talked that much with another guy, so it was obvious what was going on. I knew that my genes would never lose to yours. So the only reason that your second child has red hair is because she isn't my daughter. You probably slept with him and kept it hidden from me. He also has red hair, so it explains everything. His reasoning was absolutely ridiculous, and I reminded him that his friend was gay and already married to another man. Also, he had dyed his hair and his natural hair color was black. I asked him why he couldn't just accept that our daughter looked like me, and her hair color wasn't an unnatural phenomenon that needed to be explained. But he kept telling me to shut up, and that he was getting a paternity test no matter what. The weirdest part was that he wanted a paternity test between our daughter and his friend, instead of our daughter and him. By that point, I had already broken into tears because he was refusing to believe me no matter what. He said that he was leaving, and wouldn't come back home until I had gotten that test done and proved that he was right, and that I had cheated on him. The moment he left, I hugged my daughter and son close to my chest, and cried for a good hour. Then I called my sister to come pick me up because I was leaving. I packed all my clothes and took my kids with me. I just texted my husband that we were over, and that I was going to divorce him. It turns out, he wasn't expecting me to fight back and thought that I would do exactly as he said. He quickly began apologizing for doubting me, and urged me to come back home with the kids. He sent me selfies to prove that he hadn't stopped crying, and was miserable without me. Apparently, he had also accused his gay friend of infidelity, and gotten punched by his husband. The news of his accusations had spread and his entire friend group had cut him off, so he was completely alone now. He said that me and the kids were all he had. But while he was typing, he messed up and ended up saying that his suspicions were 100% justified. So I just blocked him after saying, "Kids? I thought you said you only have one kid. But don't worry, they will be taken care of by someone who loves them for who they are, and not just their hair color."
Nitpicky manager forced to resign after mismanaging new service. Several years ago I was working at one of the big hardware stores in my area. It's a household name and has some upward mobility with decent pay for the area. I never really found a niche there after my first year and a half. I learned quickly though, so they kinda made me a Swiss Army employee. I could work hardware, plumbing, mix paint, make keys, prepare contracts for installs and knew all the features and flaws of the appliance models we sold. I was happy to do this because I was building a reputation as someone who could do everything. 2 years in, a new program was implemented that I was uniquely qualified to assist with. They created a new position for me. It was marketed as an all-in-one renovation/remodel service for interiors. I was to assist the designer with product selection, product information, contracts and local marketing for this service. Everyone involved was super excited about it. Note, I was still only making $10 an hour in 2015 for this. The problem was that because this was brand new, no one knew how it should work. The designer basically had to figure it out for herself while I tried to catch her up with all of the store and product knowledge I had accumulated during my unique experience with the company. Issues with the program: it was way too expensive. Product to be used had to come from one of our stores, which was limiting. No one knew about it. It was a rocky start. Coworkers would call me over to talk to customers if they mentioned working on a big project, but that's all we had. No completed jobs to reference or anything provided by corporate to get us running. We made our own stuff. I put together a video advertising the service and got the nod from management to use the company card to purchase a TV and media player to roll the video on repeat. We built vignettes in the store to showcase our design ability. Enter Devin, the assistant manager. He had actually been involved in the project from the beginning, and had been pretty supportive and brought good energy at first. But I think he got fed up with issues that we couldn't control. We were, on average, charging $3,000 more for a small bathroom remodel on labor alone. Consulting and design fees were also worked into the final cost. The product was discounted to basically being tax-free, but as I mentioned, options were limited to products the company sold. It was just too expensive to make many sales on the poorer side of town, where almost everyone knows some kind of contractor or tradesman with connections. It wasn't a good market for this program, but we did manage to start hitting our numbers. Number 7 in the region for the brand new program was not bad. And just when we finally started getting some business and a rhythm around 8 months in, Devin decided that it was not working fast enough for him. Obviously the designer was to blame since he had no authority over the contractors or setting prices. She didn't know what she was doing and he was going to make some changes. He honestly didn't do much besides hover, bring bad energy and make terrible suggestions. He didn't understand the scope of what we had to do to get a customer out the door and happy. He forced us to cut corners and get the sale as quickly as possible without concern for liability or what was realistic in terms of timelines. Customers felt rushed and got nervous. They backed out. We came to a standstill. We would only have 2 or 3 designs in progress at a time, but suddenly after working our asses off building the program, we had no customers for the first time in 6 months. Obviously Devin was not subjecting us to his authority hard enough. So he went harder, and fired the designer. I lost my patience. I'm a chill dude, but I had been working my SS off for this company, making peanuts on the promise that I was working towards something. I endured working for the incompetent managers that got their positions because they started working there at 18 and made it their life. The toxic alpha male I will lead, you will follow bullshit was too much. So I started bullying him back, making fun of him in a teasing way where he couldn't really react without looking bad or losing control. I did that for a while and he left me alone to run the program in the interim since I was the only option. The designer and I had become friends though, so I was still mad about how it went down. I wasn't finished yet, but I didn't know what to do. Eventually they got another designer and Devin had me moved back to what I had been doing before. Passed over for several promotions that I was more than qualified for. Bad luck, but I was done with the place. One day we were sent an email link to an anonymous manager review survey. The store computers were set up with an always-on and logged-in user profile, so I wrote down the link and verified with a coworker that they weren't unique. In every department I visited that day, I wrote a review for Devin. All different ratings, some good, some bad, but I made the good ones so that they sounded bad, but as if I didn't know it was bad. I did that maybe 10 times. It wasn't character assassination or anything, just opinion-based stuff with some vague examples so no one could figure out it was me. I didn't lie either, I just said what people don't usually say out loud. He would barely look at anyone after that. A couple of weeks later he resigned his position as assistant manager and took an exterior design position at the other end of the store, as far away from the departments he had been over before. Basically the same thing as what we had done with interiors, but he was in the designer's shoes. I left a couple of months later to work tech support for DHS, but while I was still in training for that, my friends from the store told me he had gotten fired. Maybe he learned something? He should at least have learned how my designer friend felt. They were both fired at Christmas. One of my employees tried to force himself on another member of staff, so I was forced to take matters into my own hands. To preface, I live in a country that employs a large foreign/expat workforce, in pretty much every industry and at all levels. For someone to move here for work they have to be sponsored by a company or the individual that's employing them. I own and operate a small restaurant business here and employ more than a handful of foreigners as servers, cleaners, kitchen staff, drivers, etc. I was lounging on my couch enjoying the last of my weekend one day when I got a call telling me that one of our sponsored employees, a server who we'll call Janice, was picked up for indecent exposure essentially. Long story short, she was caught hooking up with a guy in a private booth at a local restaurant. Basically the police walked in on them whilst engaged in some seriously heavy petting. They were fully clothed but the guy she was with, or practically on top of I should say, has his junk out. Turns out he works at the restaurant 2 doors down from where she worked. After a bit of chastising and threatening to escalate the situation and have them deported to sufficiently scare their senses back into them, they let them go, but not before signing a pledge-type document promising to never repeat the offense, or else. Basically a slap on the wrist basically, and everyone got to go home. But it doesn't end there. That night something clicked in my brain and I had the thought, how and why did the police find them in a private booth in the back of a restaurant before the restaurant's own staff did? So I called the restaurant the next day. I thought maybe they called the police on them immediately for some reason. Or maybe the couple got belligerent when staff asked him to stop. Turns out the staff didn't notice a thing. In fact, up until that day the police had never been to that restaurant before, and when they did they simply walked in, went straight to the Back booths where the two were sat and busted right in. I realized this meant that someone must have seen them and called the cops on them point blank. The question was who? I decided to speak to Janice. I wanted to speak to her anyway that day both to check in and get her version of the situation. I also gave her the employer you did something stupid chat and reassured her that she's keeping her job. I also wanted to ask her who she thought called her in. Without hesitation she said it had to be Sami, who was one of our drivers. Why do you think it was Sami? I asked. He's the one that dropped me off at the restaurant that day. He might have seen my friend walk in right after me and call the police on us, she said. I knew the part of him dropping her off was true, that's literally his job and her only free mode of transport. Well, that sounds a bit drastic. Why would he do that even if he had seen you do anything? I asked. She claimed it was because he was jealous. He was really into her apparently and kept trying to get her into bed, she said. What genuinely pissed me off was when she told me that he actually tried to force himself on her once and she fought him off and that he hasn't tried or even said anything since other than being very short and curt with her. My immediate response was, why on earth would you not tell me or one of your managers right away? She said she had dealt with it her way, and it stopped, plus she didn't want anybody to get fired on her account, and she didn't want any interaction with the authorities so she decided not to make a big deal out of it in the first place. She also declined to press formal charges against him, which I advised her to do. Her declining infuriated me even more. This guy was going to get off scot-free. Now clearly I was about to fire Sami, but in my mind that wasn't enough. For someone to attempt to rope a person basically and not get in trouble for it? Not okay with me. But it seemed like it was something I had to live with. Obviously, my next conversation of the day was with Sami. My intent was to confront him with the accusations. I called him into my office. I didn't really know where to start, so I went with, obviously you've heard about what happened to Janice this weekend? He stepped in it right away. Heard about it? Came the unexpectedly proud response from a proud and positively beaming Sami. I called it in. And this is where it started to get super satisfying. You see, for a couple of years since I met Sami, every now and then he would pull out and show us all pictures of his wife, who was back home living with his mother. She was younger than him and quite beautiful, but sadly barren, which is apparently why she settled with an older fart like him. He was so proud of how pretty she was. He was also a devout religious man, or so he claimed. So I asked him why call the police? He came back with, after I dropped her off I waited to see who she was meeting because she's a troublemaker woman. When I saw the man walk in after her I called the police because I know him and he is married and this is against the laws of God and man. I'm smiling now, I knew I got him. Why do that instead of calling your direct manager, or even me, and before even seeing for yourself what they were doing exactly at that? Why make it my problem and the company's problem what she does in her own time? Silence. Head down counting his shoes. Sami, I know why. I know what you did. Janice just told me. I'm disgusted by you and sorry that we hired you. He had the audacity to mumble, I only tried once, sir. I almost slapped him. Anyways, I fired him, handed him a one-way ticket home, which was in 4 hours, and told him to GTFO. Of course, Sami was one of our employees, which meant we had his information. I had his house phone number saved somewhere from when we hired him. It was on his CV. I knew that specifically because I called him there to interview him. Before we first hired him. I waited until his flight took off and dialed the number. I assumed either his mother or wife would answer the call, but I was wishing for the latter. I got my wish. Hello Mrs. Last name. I'm your husband's employer. Well, his former employer anyway. Just so you know, I fired him a few hours ago and he's on a flight home as we speak. His flight number is XXXXX. He will be arriving at 20:20. Just so you are aware, I was forced to fire him because he attempted to rope a fellow employee half his age. I'm sorry, I said, and promptly hung up, but not before hearing her gasping in shock. I don't know what his wife is going to do to him, but I hope he suffers for everything he tried to do. Naval officer didn't want to live with degenerate enlisted, so I got him fired. I was a Navy enlisted service member and was stationed in Yokosuka, Japan for a few years before I got transferred back stateside. I worked in the main hospital that cared for service members and their beneficiaries. It's a small hospital so everyone knows everyone. Shortly after I left, I caught wind of a new physician officer working in the radiology department. My friends would say he's horrible to work with, but that's nothing new. However, someone saw him print a letter and he left it on his desk and took a picture of it and sent it to me. He's requesting to move from enlisted housing to officer. For context, military housing is available for those who are married, have a family, or are qualified based on their rank and depending on the military base itself. Typically, officer housing is much nicer than the enlisted. In Yokosuka, housing is basically the same all around because it's overseas. But most of the housing are apartments and each apartment complex is called a tower, example, Fuji Tower. There are 9 towers and 2 are for officers since enlisted members outnumber officers by a lot. Now, one thing about the military, poop happens. When getting stationed, it is the active duty member's responsibility to either apply for housing on or off base before arriving, depending on what is allowed. If there is limited space and you don't apply for housing on time, then you get put where there is space. So our new officer got placed in an enlisted tower. Mind you, enlisted members have families of their own and other officers have been placed in enlisted housing before without an issue. Here are some quotes in his letter. I have many valid objections to living in a building of almost all enlisted and even many lower enlisted being an officer. There is a lot of crime, violent actions, substance use and alcoholism that happen in enlisted housing. There are also intimate assaults and other perverts. I have a good-looking family, a wife and 2 daughters aged 3 and 4. They are prime targets to be victims for these enlisted deviant activities. My family should be safe in housing that is with officers. Officers are much more respectable and these types of deviant activities are incredibly rare compared to the deviant activities of enlisted being commonplace. Other officer families will not want to visit us because our family lives in enlisted housing. My children need to make friends with other officer children. My wife needs to make friends with other officers' wives. I need to make friends with other officers. Forcing an officer to live in a large apartment building with almost all enlisted is unethical. You get the idea, he's a piece of work. This guy basically looks down on all enlisted service members, assuming every single one are substance users, perverts/PDOS, criminals, etc. The kicker? He was an enlisted army member before going to officer school. In civilian terms, think of a manager that discriminates and calls all of his subordinates criminals, violent, alcoholics, pervs, substance users, etc. based on your job position. Forgetting that some have a family and maybe aren't any of those things. And he not only has the authority to ruin your work life, he can ruin your personal life by denying days off, making you stay late, writing you up if he doesn't like you and not letting you promote, etc. Safe to say, everyone was pissed and I had nothing to lose. I was separating soon and figured I'd have some fun before I got out. I created a burner Facebook account and posted the letter and the officer's picture on a popular military enlisted group page. Within 2 days, it spread like wildfire. But I wasn't done yet. The military has something called challenge coins. Think of trading cards but custom coins that come in many shapes and sizes. I designed one with his face and a big middle finger in the back. On top of that I designed stickers too. Show how proud us deviants are. Other coin designs came from other people as well, but so far I think mine was more popular. I sold over 70 coins to the person who originally sent me the picture at a huge discounted price so she can sell them for a profit for herself. So the officer's face is everywhere because most people keep their coins displayed on their desks. No matter where the officer went to work, he would see his face on someone's desk. And since it didn't have his name on the coin, I can't officially say it's him. I sold more stateside and even some got sent to Europe. I made about $3,000 overall, which was nice. The story even got featured on the online naval newspaper and on 2 popular YouTube channels. And if you're military, you know the only time big military care is when it's too big to sweep under the rug. This story got the officer sent up to captain's mast, which is like a Navy court. He tried to say his wife was the one that wrote the letter, but no one is buying it because her writing style is way worse. She even tried to take the fall, but no one believed her. They both ended up deleting all social media. Due to this, he got served 3 UCMJ articles, which basically are his offenses. But there's more. When you're in the military, you have a deadline on how long you can be a certain rank. If you don't pick up, then you're kicked out. And because he's new and got served UCMJ articles, he won't be up for promotion and therefore was involuntarily separated. Also, the officer program he went through pays for his PhD. When the military pays for your PhD, you have to serve 10 years to pay them back. If you don't complete 10 years, you have to pay the military back with money instead of time. So he lost his job and now has to pay back the military for his PhD, and since it takes a while for the paperwork to have him and his family sent back stateside, you can bet he socially suffered because no one worked with him. My ex's pick-me friend lied about me and now they're crawling back. I, 26, was with my ex-boyfriend, 26, for 4 years. We moved in after 2 years of dating and were genuinely happy. I genuinely thought that I was going to marry him one day. I even moved to a different country to stay with him when his job relocated him to Europe. Throughout our relationship I noticed that one of his girlfriends, 25, didn't really like me. I've tried many times to befriend her, but I gave up after constantly being on the receiving end of her cold shoulder and snarky remarks. Ex knew about this and told me that she didn't have that many girlfriends and probably didn't know how to be friends with another woman. She's the only woman in their clique of 7 guys, who were all lovely to me. On the 31st of December 2019, both of us attended a party to celebrate New Year's. I don't drink, so I was completely sober. Ex got completely smashed. The next afternoon I woke up to my stuff packed and him telling me that we were done and that I had to move out. I was completely blindsided and so confused. He accused me of cheating on him. I would never do that. I think it's such a terrible thing to do. I remember crying so hard and telling him that I did no such thing, but he still kicked me out. My best friend and her boyfriend, without hesitation, opened up their home to me and told me that I was welcome to stay. Bless their hearts. They're the sweetest couple ever. During that dark period of time, I was trying to process everything. I was honestly so depressed. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I felt like a zombie, like I was barely existing. I told my family what had happened and they were very upset for me and wanted me to fly back home. They live in a different country and I didn't want to travel during a pandemic and potentially put them at risk of catching this virus. While this was happening, all of our mutual friends and his family members turned against me, choosing to believe that I was a cheater and completely cut me off in support of my ex. They posted shady stuff about me online, calling me a hoe and a cheater. Rumors started to spread and it affected me so much that I deleted all social media and blocked all of them everywhere. I just wanted to disappear. As time went on, I was one day introduced to one of my best friend's friend. He was really sweet and kind. We slowly became friends, started chatting and video calling. Fast forward to June and I feel myself slowly falling in love with him. He doesn't believe what so many people say about me being a cheater and whatnot. He asks me out on a proper virtual date and I agree. We started dating and I'm so happy. I feel like he is the light at the end of my tunnel. Well, yesterday, someone from my ex's clique leaked a video on Instagram where my ex's girlfriend was boasting of how she lied and came up with this plan to break up my ex and I. She apparently paid someone to lie to my ex and tell him that I seduced him at the New Year's party and slept with him. Once that came out, a lot of my ex's friends and family members have been trying to contact me. They tried contacting my best friend who basically told them to F off. My ex came to the house and was begging for me to speak to him. It was really dramatic. I feel like I don't owe them any of my time at all and just want them to leave me alone. However, my parents think that it's a little sad that my ex is outside the house crying and begging to speak to me. They think that maybe I should give him a chance to speak to me. I feel really conflicted. I feel like I'm being too harsh on him and his group of friends. Should I establish a line of communication? What should I do?
My husband called me by his dead wife's name twice. Please help. I met my husband 4 years ago through the same work industry and we both instantly felt the same attraction. On our first date he told me he was widowed, that his wife had died unexpectedly at the age of 31, 2 years prior. 3 years later, we got married at the beginning of this year. Everything has been good until 2 months after we got married. I've noticed that his behavior was changing. He started to get more quiet and kept to himself. He stopped telling me about his day or talking to me about his niche interests like he usually does. I asked him if he was feeling alright because this behavior was really unusual. He admitted that while cleaning, he came across some of his previous wife's belongings and that he accidentally tossed something from their wedding night. I felt sad for him and I couldn't imagine how he felt as this is my first marriage. I tried my best to cheer him up but his happiness was short. One night, we got into a small disagreement about some movie we were watching. During the argument, he called me by her name, which is something that he had never done. He looked frightened and shocked that he said this. He kept apologizing after it and I told him it was alright. Cried and I held him. The next morning, I noticed he didn't sleep at all. I asked him if he wanted to talk about what happened the previous night. He got mad and told me he was gonna go visit his brother. I felt worried and told him I love him just for reassurance. It did hurt that he called me by her name, but part of me wanted to understand where he was coming from. I know he really loved this woman and sometimes I don't think I can amount to her. It seems like he holds her to a pedestal and I'm just there. I have hoped he doesn't actually feel that way, but with the recent events, I'm starting to think about it more and more. He came home around midnight and he apologized for what happened and how he reacted. I told him everything was fine and didn't express my concerns because I didn't want it to turn into another huge argument. A few weeks ago, we were having intimacy and while he was finishing, he called me by her name again. This time I was mortified, jumped off the bed, and moved away from him. He tried to comfort me by giving me a hug and he kept apologizing. I told him I was going to stay in our guest room and I did not feel up to a confrontation right now. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, he kept apologizing and told him it's fine. We talked for a bit. I asked him if he was alright and if he needed to speak to someone professionally. He agreed to go speak to someone, but he didn't show up to the appointment that we had set up for him. Our conversation since then has been insanely short. Everything has been weird since he called me her name during intimacy. He rarely speaks to me, only when he needs something. Which makes me sad because I do love him, but I'm scared that he doesn't love me. Worst of all, I recently found out that I'm pregnant. I'm happy because I've always wanted to be a mother, but I am sad I don't know if the father of my child even loves me anymore.
I'm falling in love with my sugar mommy wife. I'm ruining everything. About 4 years ago my wife and partner of 8 years passed away due to complications after the birth, very rare, of our second son. I was deployed at the time, and completely devastated. After flying home I felt that nothing would make me happy again. My sons are great, now 6 and 4, but overwhelming, so I asked a sister of one of my Marine buddies, Cass, to help out. She had been friends with my wife, but not great friends, and she agreed in exchange for a place to stay. At the time, Cass was only 20 years old and in quite a bit of debt at the fault of her extremely abusive ex-boyfriend, who she had finally left about 3 months earlier. During the first few weeks of her helping out with the boys, she asked to borrow money to see a doctor due to shaking hands, no insurance. I happily obliged. She was an angel, doing all of the cooking and cleaning and keeping my young family together. It turned out that she had developed some sort of neurological disorder, probably brought on by repeated abuse. At the time it seemed simple. I had good insurance, she needed healthcare, I never thought I'd be able to move on from my wife, and she was afraid of intimacy. I agreed that I would marry her, but keep our platonic relationship. She promised not to burden me with her debt. We had a prenuptial agreement and all. I know that this is fraud of the government, hence the throwaway, but we were both so damaged and needed somebody, if not intimately. The past 3 years have been about as good as expected, if not better. Cass is great, better than great. She keeps the house spotless, had food ready every night when I get home, and has been working overnights as a baker and almost has her debt paid off. Her condition has improved greatly, also, due to the great medical care she was able to receive. With the boys, she is a saint. She tells them about their mother, shows them pictures, takes the places for fun. And even taught them how to read. Of course the 6-year-old just finished kindergarten, but my 4-year-old is going to be the smartest kid in his class next year. Sometimes the 4-year-old calls her mommy but she SHHs him and reminds him that name is Cass and that mommy is the angel whose picture is above the fireplace. Once her debt is fully paid off, the kids are in school, and she saves up a bit of money, she is going to go into a nursing program. Our relationship, still platonic, but very caring. I've cried on her shoulders more times than I can count, and she's done the same. One night I was very stressed out, and yelled at her about something pretty inconsequential. She had taken my sons to see Santa without me. She, of course, became quite frightened, But we worked it out and I even offered to pay for her to see a counselor. She didn't. That was 2 years ago, and we have had little fights ever since, but have been able to work through them. She seems to understand me whenever I'm hurt, upset, or angry, and is calming in a way that I can't explain. The problem is that I think I might be falling for her. I've been noticing little things, her scent, her smile, her laugh. The way she smiles with her eyes when she sees me, how much my boys love her. Not to mention that she's gorgeous, hardworking, and one of the strongest people I've ever encountered. A few nights ago I almost kissed her after we had put the boys to bed, and her hugs goodbye have started lasting a little bit longer. The other day she was taking a nap in my bed, she was washing her sheets, and I wanted to join her. Not have intimacy with her, just lay with her and hold and kiss her. I don't know what to do, or how to even bring this up. It's been 4 years since my wife died. There have been days where my thoughts have been occupied with Cass, and I haven't even thought about my wife. I feel bad about it, and I still miss her, but I never thought that I'd be able to move on. I feel guilty and disloyal. At the same time, I want her. Not just intimately or physically, I want to be romantically intimate with her, not just as friends. I don't know how to bring it up. I don't want to scare her or make her uncomfortable. But this is becoming more difficult than I could have ever imagined. I was thinking about asking her to get dinner, just the two of us, and bringing it up. But what if she refuses? How can I gauge her interest? If it means anything, the other day she was having a hard time with the boys, they were restless and being out of hand, so I brought her home some of her favorite flowers. She was extremely giddy and gave me another lasting hug and a quick kiss on the lips. I was taken aback, but she pranced around, finishing dinner and putting the flowers in a vase. What does this mean?
My cheating husband thought I would forgive him because he's too good for me. But I divorced him and he ended up on the streets. The divorce papers said that I wanted 50% of all his assets, and that his house was to be transferred in my name. He is probably going to end up on the streets if he loses, but I literally didn't care anymore. As soon as he received the papers, he called me screaming, "What do you think you are doing? Come back right now because I am throwing these fake papers in the trash." I told him that they weren't fake, and that this was actually happening. I also made sure to record the call so I could use it as evidence later on. So I was really thankful when he began preaching about how I was inferior to him, and should be glad that he stayed with me for so long. I told him to get off his high horse, because he was talking like a true scumbag. That was the last straw for him, and he absolutely lost it. He called me several degrading names, and even insulted my performance in bed as a way to make me feel bad. But I never said anything back, and when he stopped yelling, I just asked, "Are you done?" He was too shocked by the fact that I was actually standing up to him for once, and couldn't say anything back. I hung up on him and immediately sent the record to my lawyer, who assured me that this is going to help a lot. I had forgotten to take pictures of his chat history, so he actually had a way to fight the divorce. But during the call he ended up confessing to everything and made things much easier for me. From then on, the divorce proceedings were a breeze. I made sure to squeeze out every penny that I could from him, and he had no way to fight it. His cheating was also exposed to all his friends and family, and most of them cut him off. His parents called me to apologize for their son's behavior, and told me that they disowned him but would like to maintain a relationship with me. I agreed, because they are good people and their son's crimes aren't their fault. I am now back in the house that I won in the divorce, and my ex-husband is gone. None of his friends are willing to let him stay with them because they don't trust him anymore. I think he's most likely going to go to the girl he cheated with, or end up on the street. Either way, I got my justice.
My entitled girlfriend cheated on me and accused me of being controlling. So I exposed her and now she's getting fired. I began dating my girlfriend a few months ago after we met each other at a cafe. We had a lot in common, but there was just one thing on which we disagreed on. She likes to party a lot while I like to stay home or go on recreational trips. Sometimes, she goes out in the evening and comes back the next day with just one text to me that says, "I'm going out." I have tried to talk to her about this, and explain that we will soon be into our 30s so we should look to secure our future. But she never listens and gets mad at me for suggesting she should stop partying. She argues that she's still going to our job every day and making money, so it's her choice on how to spend the rest of her day. I tried inviting her on vacations to show her that partying isn't the only way to have fun, but she always declined. Her best argument was that all her friends party daily, so she's actually quite laid back by only partying twice a week. The thing is, most of her friends are either rich kids who are going to inherit large businesses, or dropouts who live from paycheck to paycheck. None of them are in relationships, so they are really easygoing and go to clubs mainly to find hookups. I am worried that she might be influenced by their attitude and end up doing something she would regret. But every time I try to put the difference between them and her, she yells at me and calls me an insecure man. Eventually, I just decided that this was the type of girl she was, and that I shouldn't try to change it. So I let her do whatever she wanted and just loved her for who she was. Little did I know, I should have had better judgment. This week, my girlfriend had taken a break from going out and surprisingly stayed home a lot. She would greet me with an amazing dinner when I got home from work, and I was really happy with her change. But yesterday, I decided to come home early and surprise her. I bought flowers and her favorite pizza on the way home and opened the door without ringing the bell. She was in the living room and talking on the phone. But just as I was about to yell surprise, I heard her say something horrible. "Yeah, I have been sleeping with that guy for nearly a month, and every encounter with him is amazing." "Oh, my boyfriend?" "Well, I decided to act like the perfect girlfriend for this week so he wouldn't suspect anything. I know he works really hard and has a secure future, so I don't want to break up with him. The flowers and pizza just dropped from my hand as I stood there in shock. She turned to look at me with a guilty face and asked, "When did you get here? Why didn't you ring the doorbell?" "I was actually just talking about you." I told her that I had heard everything, including the fact that she was cheating on me. My head was literally boiling as she started explaining that it was just a joke between friends. I didn't fall for it though, and just asked her to get out of my house. I knew that if she stayed here, I might end up doing something I would eventually regret. But she changed her tune and began yelling at me, "Oh my God. You are so controlling and insecure. First you keep telling me not to enjoy myself, and now you're kicking me out because of a simple joke." The guy I was talking about is just my coworker. She was about to explain more, but I wasn't having any of it. I just told her that if she didn't pack up all her stuff and leave right now, I would report her for trespassing. She kept cursing at me but did eventually leave. I was distraught, but I should have seen this coming. I should have known that she didn't love me and was just using me as a safety net. Although I was sad about being cheated on, I didn't cry much and instead focused my efforts elsewhere. I wanted her to feel the consequences of what she had done, and breaking up with her wasn't going to do anything. I saw that she had posted a story about how I was manipulating her and kicking her out, so I made a post about what she had done. It was embarrassing to admit to everyone that I got cheated on, but I didn't care. I just wanted everyone to see how she treated me. Apparently, one of her female coworkers saw my post and reported her to her boss. Their company had a very strict policy about dating each other, and she literally got fired the next day. She called me and began blaming it on me, saying that I needed to take responsibility by giving her money while she looks for another job. But I just told her that maybe her friends can help her, and blocked her. I organized all the students against my political science professor. I was a non-traditional student, so I was a little older and a little more willing to question things. I was taking a 3000 level political science course, so it designed was for poli-sci majors and was required for my poli-sci degree. It was a fairly basic political science course, but the professor did some weird things. Specifically, there was a quiz every class over the assigned reading. These quizzes made up a significant part of the grade. But here's the tricky part, he seemed to be doing some sort of experiment with the wisdom of crowds. The correct answer for a quiz question was the answer that was given by the most students in the class, whether it was based in fact or not. Whatever the most students said was the answer was the correct answer. For example, if the question was what year was the US Constitution ratified? Even though the factually correct answer would be 1789, if the majority of people chose 1776, then 1776 was the right answer and you got credit for your answer. If you chose 1789, you were wrong and didn't get credit. This forced you to make a decision, try to be factually accurate or try to figure out what the crowd was going to do and go with that. Neither guaranteed you a correct answer. The majority of the time, the majority of students would actually choose the factually correct answer. But if it was a common misconception, or the question was poorly worded, then that could lead to a situation where the crowd was wrong. But here's the thing that drove me nuts. 1. I was not willing to make my grade dependent on whatever the other students thought might be the correct answer. 2. My grade became dependent on conforming to what the crowd said was true. I had no real control over my grade since the wisdom of the crowd could be anything. 3. A class of 30 students was probably not a large enough crowd to give you a good example of the wisdom of crowds. 4. Learning the material was not the point. Conforming to the crowd was what got you a good grade. I figured out that if we all agreed to choose the same answer for every question, then we could all guarantee ourselves a perfect score on the quiz. In reality, I only needed a plurality of people to go along with my plan. As long as I could muster enough votes for an answer, then we could control our destiny. It didn't matter if A was the correct answer or not. If we controlled the votes, we controlled our grades. And anyone who didn't go with us, they were going to fail regardless of if their answer was actually correct or not. I met everyone at the door to the classroom and explained the plan. For every question, we are going to choose the first option. If it's multiple choice, it's option A. If it's true/false, we are choosing true. If we all agree to this, then we can all get perfect scores. If you decide to go against us, your answer will be wrong. The first class we did this, the professor figured out after a few questions that we were gaming the system. He had us redo the quiz and graded us on the factually correct answers. After the second class we did this, the professor changed the rules. There were 2 answers that would get you full points, the factually correct answer, and whatever answer the majority agreed upon. In the end, I was okay with this arrangement. I could study and give the correct answer without being penalized for not conforming to the crowd's thinking, or if I made the same mistake as the majority of people then I still got credit for it and it was a good discussion point for the class. Yes, I got an A in the class. I'm not sure if the professor ever figured out who organized the rebellion. But I did end up working with him in grad school and we got along just fine. My ex broke my heart, so I broke him. I'm 28, dated a guy for almost 3 years. To make it easy to understand, I'll refer to my ex as Sam, who's also 28. It was a long-distance relationship. We met through a dating app and we hit it right off. The first few months were great, we had so much in common and to me, it really seemed like this relationship was going to be serious. He was my first boyfriend. I held off on dating to focus on my studies and my career. He supported me throughout my master's and my career development and I helped him through major life changes that he was going through. I had always wanted a first and last relationship. I thought I had hit the jackpot with this guy. I travel a lot for my job. The company sends me out to different states to attend conferences, conduct training, etc., and most of these conferences are held in Sam's hometown. Even though it was a long-distance relationship, we would see each other more often because of the convenience of my job. I would stay in his apartment whenever I was there, and he would also fly to my hometown and stay at my apartment for weeks at a time. Everything was great until after our first anniversary. He started to become distant. During this time, I hadn't been able to fly down to his hometown because I was busy with training in our office. I never made him feel like he was less of a priority, and I would always text throughout the day. Whenever we were together, I basically did what I thought a good girlfriend should do. I really thought I was doing good for my first relationship. Until he asked for a break. I admit, I did beg and cry when he asked for it, but ultimately, I couldn't do anything and decided to accept it and move on. I was heartbroken, but I poured my attention into my job and eventually got promoted. 2 months passed and Sam reached out to me with a really long message. Basically, he was apologizing for the sudden breakup without an explanation, and he explained why he had to do it. And that he loved me and he knew that he was wrong, but if I wasn't willing to give him a second chance, then he would just settle for us being friends because he said I was a great person and a great friend. My trust was ruined at this point, but I wasn't really mad at him, and I admit that I still loved him, so we decided on starting all over again, but as friends. To make it short, we ended up dating again after 5 months. I really thought this was like his redemption arc and he'd be more attentive and loving towards me, and he was. For like 3 months, and then he started being distant again. I slowly noticed a pattern with his actions. I asked a close friend of mine for some advice, and she told me that Sam was breadcrumbing me. He would give me attention and love and then suddenly stop, so I would start to beg for more. After our second anniversary, he suddenly ghosted me. No message, no nothing. I was blocked on everything. I couldn't call or text his number. Nada. This time, I wasn't as heartbroken. Instead, I was contemplating what the heck this man was trying to do to me. He was toying with my emotions when all I had given him was genuine love. It started to piss me off, but again, I didn't want to do anything about it and just moved on. 3 months go by and Sam was back in my DMs. This time with a different message. He wasn't asking for another chance or anything, he was just explaining why he had done it. Basically, it was all half-assed explanations. He was leaving his old job and he got busy with a new job, and he didn't have time for me, so he thought he'd get everything done before he would fly down to my hometown and reconcile. He asked if he could come and visit me and we can talk it all out. During this time, I had found out that during the time we were together, he was cheating on me, and apparently it didn't work out with that girl, so he came back to me. He had done this in the past as well. All of this was confirmed by a friend I had who moved to his hometown, who became my source of intel. This is when I felt a switch turn on in my head. I knew what he was doing, and instead of turning him down and just moving on, I wanted him to feel the way I felt when he did all of this to me. I told him he could come and visit me and that I'll be waiting for him. At this point, I knew he knew I was acting out of character. He asked me if I was really okay with meeting him and talking things out, and I said yes. A week passed and he actually flew down to my hometown, and he had the audacity to come to my apartment and stay with me for 3 weeks. I welcomed him with open arms nonetheless. We talked and he apologized over and over again. He kept insisting that he wasn't good enough for me to give him another chance. He kept saying how much of an a-hole he was for doing that to me, and I never deserved all of that. He would understand if I wanted to throw him out right then and there. I hugged him and told him that I still loved him and that I wanted to make things work between us. He was taken aback because he wasn't expecting this reaction from me. I told him that he was the only one who understood me, and I never felt this kind of attraction with anyone else. He hugged me back and told me how much he missed me and how much he loved me. We agreed to spend the 3 weeks together rebuilding our relationship. For the next 3 weeks, I treated him like a king. Showering him with love and affection. Cooking for him, making all of his favorite dishes. We would go out on dates almost every night. I bought him video games that he liked, and I would let him play all night while I sit next to him and just watch him enjoy himself. I effed his brains out every night. He would whisper words of love for me after we did the deed, and it was exactly what I wanted. 3 weeks was up and he had to fly back to his hometown. He couldn't keep his hands away from me the day before he had to leave. He kept telling me how much he wanted to stay and live with me. I played right into his fantasy and told him I wanted that as well. I, in fact, did not want that at all. I told him I'd come and visit him the next chance I get. When he left, I felt relieved. Faking everything was exhausting, but I wasn't done yet. We kept texting, calling and FaceTiming each other when he got back to his hometown. Something he rarely wanted to do with me before. I wanted to drive him mad. I wanted to drive him crazy, like what he almost made me went through. I started ignoring his texts and calls until he became desperate. I would make up some excuse about being super busy and that I would make it up to him. Next thing I did was to randomly post pictures of me and some male coworkers that would make it seem like we were on a date. I would post them on my IG story and quickly delete them once Sam had viewed them. He would blow up and start calling me asking who that was and where I was. I would tell him, "What are you talking about, babe? I've been so busy I haven't even gotten the time to be on my phone," which is an obvious blatant lie, but the more I did it, the more Sam started to question himself. Started to question if he truly saw what he saw. He would apologize and admit that he missed me so much and wanted to be with me as soon as possible. He was slowly becoming obsessed with me, and that's what I was hoping for. It got to the point where it drove him mad whenever I started to act coldly towards him. I would always play dumb whenever he would ask why I was acting so cold. He would ask if I wanted to break up with him, and I would say, "Why would I do that? You're the only one for me." Whenever I would say those words, his face would go from relieved to worried in a split second. I kept doing all of these for months until the slight thought of me leaving him drove him insane. He once flew down to my hometown unannounced when I was acting cold towards him. He banged on my door at 10 p.m. and he only brought a backpack with him with a few clothes. He clung to me that night, and obviously I reassured him that I wasn't going to leave him, and I once again, excuse my French, gave him effing of a lifetime. He had to fly home the next day, and I reassured him that I'll always be here for him. Little did he know that I'll be temporarily sent to Europe for a month-long training and I'm not planning on contacting him. The moment I leave, I'm blocking him on everything and I'll be deleting all of my social media accounts. Am I a psycho? Probably.